At 54, after 22 years of marriage, Clara Voss walked out of a Louisville conference room with a settlement check for $31,000, a storage unit key, and the deed to a sawmill on a creek road in Harlan County that nobody had touched in 15 years. Her husband kept the house in St. Matthews, the investment accounts, and the business she had run while he played golf and attended conferences in cities she never saw. His lawyers had appraised the sawmill at $18,000. Her lawyer had called that acceptable. She had not said anything. She had taken the pen and signed the document and folded her copy into her coat pocket. And when she walked out onto 3rd Street, the October air was cold and tasted like river water and exhaust. And she had stood there for a moment with no particular plan. The storage unit held clothes, 2 boxes of books, and a cast-iron skillet her mother had left her. Everything else had stayed in the house. This had been deliberate. She didn't want to walk through those rooms again, selecting. She drove east on Y-64 and then south on the Mountain Parkway, and she did not play music. There was nothing she wanted to hear. The mountains came up around her slowly, the way they always had, first as dark shapes at the edge of the lowland sky, then as something you were inside of. She crossed into Harlan County just before 9 o'clock at night, the headlights picking up guardrails and tree lines, and a county road marker green and slightly bent. Clover Creek Road was 6 miles off the main highway. She had driven it once before, when Howard was alive, when her daughter Meg was small and the mill was still running. She remembered the sound of it then, the high whine of the saws, the smell of cut wood and creek water mixed together in the summer heat. Howard standing in the yard with sawdust on his arms, waving as they pulled in. The mill came into view around a curve. Her headlights crossed the sign first, hand-painted by Howard himself. The letters faded now to pale outlines, readable only because she already knew what they said. Voss Mill. Established 1969. One corner of the east wing roof had come down, and kudzu had moved up the south wall and was reaching for the eave. But the main structure was standing. She could see the office window from the drive, and through it, still on the sill, a coffee mug. She sat in the car for a moment with the engine running, then she turned it off. The camp cot she had bought at a BP station outside Hazard cost $42. She set it up in Howard's office between his steel desk and the window that looked out on the creek. The window glass was cold when she put her hand flat against it. Outside, the creek was loud. She had forgotten how loud mountain water was, how it filled every quiet and made its own kind. She didn't sleep. She lay on the cot and listened to the water and the wind moving through the collapsed east wing, and somewhere past midnight, a barred owl started up in the hardwoods above the road, and she listened to that too. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't sad. She was something quieter than both, the way you sometimes feel after a long storm passes, when the air has been emptied and the world is just what it is again. Stripped down. Matter of fact. Howard had been dead 14 months. The estate had taken 11 of those months to settle, and she had spent the remaining 3 in a temporary apartment in the Highlands, going through the motions of a future she hadn't figured out yet. She was 54 years old. She had $31,000 in a sawmill and an October sky full of stars that she could see through the east wing gap where the roof had given way. She watched them through the hole in the ceiling until her eyes closed. In the morning, she was going to need to understand what she had. She woke before 6 to gray light and the smell of cold concrete and old wood, and she walked every room in the main structure with Howard's flashlight, which she had found in the top drawer of his desk, still working. The west wing was sound. The floor was gritty with years of dust, but the joists were solid underfoot. She tested each one as she went, heel first. The milling equipment had been sold off when Howard closed, hauled away by a buyer from Pikeville, and what remained were the brackets and anchor bolts in the concrete floor, ghost shapes of the machines that had once filled the room. The walls were board and batten, vertical fir, dark with age and oil. Howard had built this room in 1969 with lumber he milled himself, and it had held. The east wing was another matter. A section of roof 30 feet wide had come down, and the floor beneath it was warped and punky with water damage. 2 of the framing members had broken and dropped, but the walls were still standing and the damage was local. It hadn't moved through the structure. She stood in the doorway and looked at it with her flashlight and made a private calculation. Repairable. Expensive, but repairable. The office was intact. The steel desk was bolted to the floor with 4 half-inch anchor bolts. She didn't know why Howard had done this, bolted the desk down. It wasn't the kind of thing you did unless there was a reason. She filed this away. She opened the desk drawers and found a box of pencils, a tin of mints, a pocket Bible worn down to the binding, and a folded county road map from 1987. At 9:30, a truck came down Clover Creek Road and turned into the drive. The woman who got out was 78 years old at least, wearing a canvas barn coat and carrying a cast-iron skillet covered with a dish towel. She walked to the front of the mill like she knew the ground, which she did. "You're Howard's girl," she said. It wasn't a question. "His niece," Clara said. "Clara. I know who you are. I'm Mabel Creech. I live half a mile up the road. I brought cornbread." She said this the way you state a fact about weather. Then she looked at the mill, took it all in, the collapsed east wing, the kudzu, the faded sign, and something in her face went through a private reckoning. "Well," she said finally, "it's standing." They sat on the tailgate of Clara's truck and drank coffee from a thermos Mabel had brought and ate the cornbread, which was made with real butter and was still warm. Mabel had known Howard since before the mill was built, she said. Since they were both in their 30s and the county was different than it was now. Louder in certain ways, more people, the coal still running. Everybody with a reason to stay. "What was he like?" Clara asked. "Day to day." Mabel thought about this. "Quiet," she said. "Steadier than quiet. He didn't talk about what he did for people. He just did it. You'd only find out later, usually by accident. Somebody would mention it at church, or you'd hear something at the hardware store. And when you'd bring it up to him, he'd find a way to change the subject." She looked at the sign above the mill door. "Howard Voss died owing nothing to anyone and being owed by the whole county. That's how I want to go." Clara didn't say anything. She held her coffee cup in both hands and felt the warmth of it. After Mabel left, she went back into the office and started clearing the floor. She moved boxes of old invoices and a wooden cabinet and a stack of highway equipment catalogs from the 1990s, and she swept with a broom she found hanging behind the office door, and at some point in the late afternoon, when she was on her knees cleaning a corner behind where the cabinet had stood, she put her palm flat on the concrete floor and felt, not with her eyes but with her hand, a seam. She sat back on her heels. It wasn't a crack. Cracks were irregular. This was straight and deliberate, running in an L shape, about 2 feet on each side. A panel. Fitted so flush she had walked over it a dozen times without knowing. She got the flathead screwdriver from the truck. It took 4 minutes of working the blade into the edge before the panel shifted. She got her fingers under it and pulled, and it came up in one piece, a 1/4-inch steel plate set in a poured concrete frame, dry as a bone. Beneath it was a niche about 12 inches deep and 2 feet square, and inside the niche was a lockbox. On top of the lockbox was an envelope. Her name was on it in Howard's handwriting, the same hand that had written Voss Mill. Established, 1969 above the door. The same hand she had seen on birthday cards that came every year without fail until they stopped coming because Howard was gone. She sat on the concrete floor. She held the envelope in her lap. She didn't open it yet. It felt important not to open it yet, as though she needed to know more before she could hold whatever was inside it. She set it carefully on the desk. Then she lifted the lockbox out of the niche, set it on the desk beside the envelope, and opened the clasp. Inside were savings bonds, 20 or 30 of them, banded together. A folded piece of paper with a column of numbers in pencil. And underneath everything, a ledger, small, cloth-covered, the kind you could buy at a 5 and dime, the spine reinforced with black electrical tape. She opened the ledger to the first page. Howard had written the first entry in 1971. March 4th, 1971. Darnell Prewitt, $40 for seed corn after the late freeze. Told him it was a sale price. It wasn't. The handwriting was small and unhurried, the kind of handwriting that comes from a person who thinks before they write and means what they put down. She turned the page. October 12th, 1974. Cora Blevins, milled her lumber at cost, didn't charge for the third load. Husband's back gave out. She's doing it alone this winter. June 9th, 1978. Tom Colton loaned $220 for the electric bill. Said he'd pay when he could. He did. 2 years later, $3 at a time. Never mentioned it again. February 2nd, 1982. First Baptist fire. Milled all the replacement framing free. Pastor tried to pay. Told him the Lord would sort it out. Clara sat very still in Howard's chair. The window light was going amber now, late afternoon moving toward evening, and she had turned on Howard's desk lamp. Still working, still throwing its same circle of yellow light. And she read the ledger, the way you read a letter you have been waiting a long time to receive. The names accumulated. The Blankenship family. 3 separate entries across 7 years. The Combs family. Twice. The Hensley boys, who had needed someone to co-sign for a lumber delivery and hadn't had anyone else to ask. Every entry had a specific reason. Not helped with finances, but a cracked engine block, a wife in the hospital, a roof that couldn't hold another winter. Howard had not generalized. He had known exactly who he was helping and why, and he had written it down so there would be a record, though Clara could not imagine who he had thought would ever read it. Maybe no one. Maybe that wasn't the point. The entries in the 1990s were more varied. A girls' volleyball team whose school board budget had been cut. A mortgage co-sign for a young couple with 3 children and 1 income who needed someone to vouch for them at the bank. An 81-year-old man named Burl Fenton who had wanted his barn fixed before he died. And Howard had milled the lumber for 3 weeks at no charge because the man had simply asked, and his reason had been sufficient. August 30th, 1989. Shelby Prewitt. First month's rent, $310. She has a boy, 2 years old, no husband anymore. She didn't ask. I offered. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She hadn't. Clara paused on this one. Prewitt. The same family name as the first entry, 1971. She turned back and checked. Darnell Prewitt, 1971. Shelby Prewitt, 1989. 2 generations. She didn't know what the connection was, mother, daughter-in-law, something else. But it had not been an accident that Howard had written them both down on these same pages, the same name across 18 years of this county's life. She turned pages slowly now, reading every entry. January 2002. A hospital balance paid quietly, $840 through a billing office where Howard had said he was family. September 2006. $500 to keep a diner called Ware's from closing through the winter. Small amounts always. The kind of amounts that could be set aside month by month if you were careful and patient, and never asked for anything in return. The entries slowed in the early 2000s. His handwriting was the same, but the dates were further apart. He was getting older. The mill was winding down. The county was winding down. And then, March 18th, 2008. Last entry before closing. Everything I could save is in the box. 37 years of small amounts. It adds up if you're patient. Total saved in bonds and cash, $41,200. Clara looked at the savings bonds banded together in the lockbox. She looked at the folded paper with the column of numbers. She had understood, somewhere in the middle of reading, what these were. But the total still made her sit back. $41,000. Set aside in small pieces across 37 years. Reinvested. Never touched. She turned to the back pages of the ledger, where the dates grew sparse. And she found herself. December 9th, 2004. Clara called tonight. She sounded like she was underwater. That husband of hers has been spending her down for years, and she won't say it out loud. I don't know why she stays. Pride, maybe. Same kind I had at her age. I hope she finds her way out before it costs her everything. If she does, I want her to have this place. She's the only one who ever asked me what the mill smelled like in the mornings. Clara read this twice. Then she set the ledger down flat on the desk, and she put both hands over her face. And she sat like that for a long time while the desk lamp burned its yellow circle and the creek ran in the dark outside and the October wind moved through the gap in the east wing. She had called him that night. She remembered it, standing in the kitchen while Dennis slept upstairs, calling Howard at 10 o'clock because she needed to hear a voice that wasn't complicated. She had not told him anything specific. She had talked about the weather and his garden and something she had read. She had not said that she was frightened or that she felt like she was disappearing inside her own life. She had thought she was hiding it. She had not been hiding it. If you've made it this far into Clara's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. She sat in Howard's chair until she could breathe normally again. Then she straightened. She looked at the envelope on the desk with her name on it, and she decided she still wasn't ready. Not tonight, not until she understood more. She tucked the envelope inside the front cover of the ledger and closed the ledger and put it back in the lockbox. She made herself a cup of instant coffee on the camping stove she had set up on the workbench. She stood at the window and drank it and watched the creek in the dark. She had $31,000 and a sawmill, and $41,000 more that an old man had saved for 37 years because he believed she would need it, and because she had once asked him what the mill smelled like in the mornings. She had asked because she wanted to know. She had asked because she was the kind of person who asked things like that and meant them. She thought about what Mabel had said. Howard Voss died owing nothing to anyone and being owed by the whole county. She stood there until her coffee was gone. Then she went to the camp cot and lay down, and for the first time in months, she slept without waking. She started with the east wing. There was no plan beyond the obvious, get the roof closed before the hard rain came in. She drove to Hazard for materials, ridge caps, felt underlayment, framing lumber, and loaded the truck herself and drove back on the mountain parkway and stacked everything against the west wing wall. Then she climbed a ladder and spent the rest of that day getting a tarp over the open section, lashed down at the corners with rope threaded through the old anchor holes in the fascia board. It was not elegant, but it stopped the rain. The days had a shape now. Morning. Coffee. An hour reading Howard's invoices and the county records she had pulled from the clerk's office to understand exactly what she owned. Afternoon. Physical work. Pulling damaged framing, stacking debris, scrubbing the west wing floor until the pine came up clean. Evening. The ledger. She had started reading it from the beginning again, slower this time, keeping her own list on a legal pad. Names, dates, amounts, circumstances. On the third day, at 7:30 in the morning, she heard a truck slow on Clover Creek Road and stop on the shoulder. She walked out. A man in his mid-20s was crouched at the front of a battered F-150, passenger side hood propped, looking at a split radiator hose with the expression of someone who has been having a long morning already. "Blue on the hill," he said when he saw her. "Sorry, I know this is private property. You need a phone? I need a new hose, but the phone first. He stood. He was a few inches over 6 feet, with a framer's build, and there was a tool bag in the truck bed she could see from 20 feet away. Danny Prewitt. The name from the ledger, Darnell Shelby, settled quietly in her memory. She didn't say anything about it. Clara Voss, Howard's niece, same cadence as Mabel. I'm sorry about your uncle. He was a good man. She pointed at the collapsed east wing. You know framing? He looked at it for a moment. The real assessment, not the social kind. Yeah, he said. I'll give you meals and the back room while the truck's down, if you want to work. He looked at her for a moment. She did not explain further. All right, he said. He worked without being told, which was the best kind. He pulled the ruined framing in a morning and had the structure reblocked by afternoon and was up on the roof before she thought to check on him. He didn't talk much while he worked, but he talked over meals. Careful, factual talk about the county. Which contractors in Harlan were reliable, lumber grades and roof pitch. He slept in the back room with his tools and was up before her every morning. On the 6th day, they came. It began with Mabel. Another cast iron pan, chicken and dumplings this time, set on the workbench without ceremony. An hour later, Walt Sizemore drove in with a load of 2x6s stacked and strapped in his flatbed. He got out and shook Clara's hand and said, Anita used to say Howard saved us once. Figured we were overdue. He wouldn't hear of being paid. 2 teenage boys arrived in the afternoon with a paper bag of roofing nails and left it inside the door before she could ask their names. That evening, a man in his 60s pulled up with a generator in the back of a van and spent an hour getting it running in the West Wing and said, I'm Kenny Ware. I run the diner on Route 421. Howard kept my door open one winter when I had nothing. I've been waiting to put that somewhere useful. Each of them said some version of the same thing. Different words, the same weight. Howard helped us once. We're glad you're here. Nobody had been invited. She had mentioned to Mabel that she was fixing the East Wing, and Mabel had said something to someone, and Mountain News had done the rest. Clara thought about Howard, writing it all down, the names, the amounts, the reasons, never telling anyone. And how, all these years later, it had not needed to be told. People knew, the way you know a creek is cold before you touch it, and they had been looking for somewhere to put it. On the 12th day, a black Escalade turned into the mill drive. The man who got out was about 50, well-built, wearing a wax cotton jacket and clean boots. He surveyed the property the way a developer surveys a property, measuring with his eyes before he spoke. Then he smiled, the practiced kind that had opened a lot of doors. Ray Colton, he said, recreational property development out of Lexington. I've been watching this parcel a couple of years. He looked at the new roof framing, at Danny on the ridge. You've been busy. I have, Clara said. I'd like to make you an offer. $60,000. Fair market for the lot plus the creek easement given the condition. She thought of Tom Colton in the ledger. $220 for the electric bill. She kept this to herself. I'm not selling, she said. His smile held. It's a long drive out here, he said. And there's still a lot of work to do. I just want you to know you have options. I know I have options, Clara said. Thank you for driving out. He left his card on the fence post. She left it there. 2 weeks later, a process server delivered a quiet title lawsuit filed in Harlan Circuit Court. Colton Properties, LLC versus Clara Voss, claiming a gap in the chain of title from a 1964 survey. She read the paperwork at Howard's desk that night and set it flat. Then she went to the lockbox and took out the 2001 deed modification, signed and notarized, filed with a Lexington title company Howard had trusted, unrecorded at the county because of a records transfer gap when the firm was absorbed. It was fully valid, Howard had known exactly what he was doing. He had built in a backup. She called Mabel in the morning. Mabel knew exactly who Clara needed. Warren Gibbs was 71 years old, retired from Harlan County property law after 39 years, living on a ridge above Catrins Creek, with a wood stove and more energy than most men his age. He drove to the mill in a 15-year-old Subaru with a briefcase on the passenger seat and read the quiet title filing standing at Howard's desk, saying nothing. Then Clara showed him the deed modification, and when he looked up, there was something in his face that she recognized. The look of finding something you were hoping would be there. This was filed with Harlan Title Associates, he said, absorbed by a Lexington firm in 2008. When the records transferred, some supplemental instruments didn't migrate, so the county doesn't have it on file, but it exists, and it's valid. He set it down. Colton's lawyers looked for a gap. There isn't one. Can you file a response? He looked at her. I went to law school on borrowed money, he said. Howard Voss lent me the bar examination fee in 1979. I passed the second try and paid him back, and he told me not to mention it. I've never forgotten it. He picked up his briefcase. I'll file Monday. The hearing was held on a Tuesday in November. Warren presented the deed modification and the original chain of title. Colton's attorney had built his case on an absence, a gap that existed only because of a records transfer error. And when Warren placed the notarized original on the table, the gap was filled, and the case was over. The judge read the document, asked one clarifying question, and dismissed the suit 11 minutes after the hearing began. Clara drove back to the mill on Clover Creek Road with the windows down, even in the cold. She went straight to the office and sat for a moment with her hands flat on Howard's desk. He had filed it in the right place, with the right people, 23 years before. He had not assumed the ordinary record would be sufficient. He had been careful, the same way he was careful about everything, in advance, quietly, without explaining himself to anyone. She heard Danny come in around 4 that afternoon. He had been to Hazard for ridge material, and came back in the last light and was unloading in the yard, and she heard his footsteps slow near the office door. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with the ledger in his hands. She had left it open on the workbench that morning, open to the early pages. He had come in from outside, stopped, read where it was open, and kept turning. Shelby Prewitt, he said. That's my mother's name. Clara didn't say anything. August 1989. He looked at the page. She had a boy, 2 years old. He looked up. That's me. He was quiet. He wasn't performing anything. There was just a stillness in him, the kind that comes when something large settles into place and you haven't decided yet what to do with it. She never told me, he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Maybe she didn't know how to say it, Clara said. He nodded once. He closed the ledger and set it carefully on the workbench. Then he went back out to finish unloading. Clara heard him working in the yard for another 2 hours. When she checked at dusk, the materials were stacked and covered, and Danny's light was on in the back room. He stayed. He didn't say anything more about it that night or the next day. But from that point on, he was more careful with the building than he had been before. And he had already been careful. He was building something that had a different weight in his hands now. Meg arrived on a Friday evening, unannounced, in a good coat, and stood in the mill yard looking at what had been done. She was 29 and had spent the past several months in Lexington consulting with her father's attorneys on certain matters. This had not been discussed between them. It had existed as a shape in the air. She stood and looked at the repaired east wing, the generator light in the windows, the clean yard where there had been years of debris. She looked at her mother on the front steps. I didn't know it looked like this, she said. I didn't either, Clara said, when I got here. They sat on the porch until well past midnight with coffee between them, and some things were said that had needed saying for longer than either of them had been willing to say them. Before she left, Meg stood on the porch and looked at the sign above the door. "You're staying?" she said. "Yes," Clara said. Meg was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said. Ray Colton came back on a Thursday, a week after the dismissal. He drove a work pickup this time, not the Escalade. He pulled into the yard and stood with his hands in his jacket pockets looking at the mill. "No agenda," he said. "I lost. That's done." He paused. Was there anything of Howard's still here? Records? Paperwork? Clara went inside and came out with the ledger. She showed him Tom Colton's entry. June 9th, 1978. $220 for the electric bill. Then she turned to the loose page tucked at the back, undated, a different hand pressure. The entry about the 12-year-old boy who had come in and asked to sweep the floor and been given $3 and lunch. Ray read it slowly. He read Tom Colton's entry twice. His jaw moved slightly. "I was 12 in 1985, he said. "I know." He stood there holding the ledger with both hands. He looked up at the sign above the door, at the repaired roof line against the November sky. Something was moving through him that she didn't need to name. "My father never told me any of this," he said. "Most people don't tell those stories," Clara said. "He was just writing it down so someone would know." Ray handed the ledger back carefully. He stood in the yard another moment. "I've got materials," he said, "from a project that fell through. Good timber framing stock, ridge caps, some hardware. Thought you might be able to use it." "I could use it," Clara said. He nodded. He got in the truck. He drove away. She opened the letter on a Sunday morning in late November. The mill was quiet. Danny had driven to see his mother for the weekend, the first time since finding her name in the ledger. Clara had not asked what he planned to say. She made coffee and carried it to Howard's desk and sat down and picked up the envelope. She had been waiting for the right moment without knowing what it was, and now it was here. The building solid around her, the east wing closed against the sky, the creek running outside. She slit the envelope with a table knife. Howard's handwriting, the same unhurried hand. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means you needed somewhere to go. I'm sorry I'm not here to open the door myself. I've known for a long time that things weren't right for you. I could hear it in your voice, those late calls. You never said it plainly, and I never pushed. Because that's how we both are. We hold things quietly until we can't. And then we do what needs doing. I trust you'll do what needs doing. The bonds and the cash are yours outright. The property is yours. The deed was modified in 2001 to close a gap I'd noticed in the county records, so keep that document somewhere safe. There's a Lexington title firm that has a copy. I want to tell you why I left it to you specifically. It isn't because you need it more than other people. You might not. It's because you were the one who asked me, years ago, what this place smelled like in the mornings. Pine and creek water and iron, I told you. Cold metal and warm wood. You said it sounded like the best kind of work. That's the only kind worth doing. This county gave me my life. I've tried to give some of it back, quietly, in amounts people could accept without embarrassment. I kept the record because I wanted there to be proof, not of my own goodness, I'm not interested in that, but proof that small amounts of money, given at the right moment, change things. The record is evidence. Show it to people if you need to, or don't. Keep the light on either way. I have one request. Whatever you make of this place, keep it open. Keep the door unlocked and the coffee on. People will find their way here if there's somewhere to find. I love you, Clara. I always thought you'd be all right. I still do. Howard. She sat with the letter in her hands until the coffee was cool. She read it once more. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease and put it back in the envelope and put the envelope back inside the front cover of the ledger. And she sat for a while doing nothing at all. Outside, the creek ran. A wind came through the hollow and rattled the new ridge caps on the east wing roof. She went to make more coffee. By December, Voss Mill had become something she hadn't fully planned but recognized when she saw it. She had opened the west wing as a community workshop, nothing formal, just tools on the wall and a workbench and a posted sign that said, "Use what you need. Put it back when you're done." She ran a small lumber yard on the south side, selling local timber at honest prices. The coffee pot stayed on all day. Mabel came by on Tuesdays with whatever was in season and stayed for an hour. Kenny Ware came by sometimes after closing and sat on the workbench and talked about the county the way people who love a place talk about it, with clarity and no sentimentality about what was gone. Two of the teenage boys who had brought roofing nails in October had started coming by on weekends to work alongside Danny, who taught them without ceremony. One morning in late January, a pallet of framing lumber arrived on a flatbed with no invoice and a Colton Properties delivery tag. Clara signed for it. She sent no message. It didn't seem necessary. Winter opened slowly toward spring. The hardwoods on the ridge above the road budded. The creek ran higher with snowmelt. Clara's $31,000 had been used on the building, and Howard's $41,000 sat in a Harlan County savings account, earning interest quietly, available when it was needed. She paid Danny a fair wage and held the rest against the future. In the same spirit Howard had held it, in small amounts, patiently, for purposes not yet known. On a Wednesday in April, she was in the yard stacking lumber when a car slowed on Clover Creek Road. It didn't pull in. It sat on the shoulder. She had seen this before. People who needed something but hadn't decided yet whether to ask. She set down what she was carrying and walked to the edge of the drive and waved. The car pulled in. A woman in her mid-40s got out with the look of someone who had been driving for a while. Not the tourist kind, but the kind where you're not sure where you're going until you get somewhere. She looked at the mill, at the open doors, at the sign above the entrance. "I wasn't sure if you were open," she said. "We're open," Clara said. "Come in, I just put coffee on." The woman stood for another moment in the yard. She looked at the building the way Clara had looked at it the night she arrived, trying to understand what it was, what it could be. Then she came inside. Clara poured 2 cups and set them on the workbench. Danny was in the back, working. The mill smelled like pine and creek water and iron, cold metal and warm wood, the same as it always had. And the light came through the west wing windows in long bars across the swept floor, and the door stood open to the spring air. That evening, after the woman had gone, with a name Clara had written in the margin of her legal pad, and a question about the workshop space that Clara had answered carefully and honestly, Clara sat at Howard's desk and opened the ledger to the last blank page. She had been carrying a pen in her pocket for weeks. She took it out. She wrote her name first, then the date. Then she began.